whatever the case is, get back. Where were we? You do
Well,
this
we
to
had
me.
been talking about Luciano and how he got deported after, like that was the deal they made after he gives all the intelligence, gets deported to Italy.
It goes back to Hoover.
Yeah.
So Hoover never felt the mob was a threat to the American way of life.
Yes, they're patriotic.
Right. Now, so why did Hoover ignore the mob? This is the crucial question. And I make a great outline for it in both books because I talk about it briefly in volume 1 and I got into it much more deeply in volume 2 because Bobby went after him for it. Hoover felt
Kennedy. Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy. Hoover felt that, look, if we do a deep dive into the mob, it's going to lead one place, and that's Washington, D.C. Yeah. Okay.
Was he relating that to the naval intelligence from World War II?
No, forget
Forget
forget this is naval intelligence and World War II's done. That was in the 40s, right?
Okay.
Now we're going up to 1960. Bobby's AG. Bobby's Attorney General.
Yeah. I'm saying, what is the context of Hoover saying it's going to come back to D.C.?
Well, so Bobby's hounding Hoover to go after the mob, and Hoover's dragging his feet. He don't want to do it. Even after Appalachian. He don't want to.
57.
Right, because Hoover put in all of these eavesdropping devices. They're called black bag jobs. And he puts all of these illegal eavesdropping devices in mob social clubs throughout the country. And he's listening to them talk, and they're going, that mayor owes us. The governor owes us. We got that congressman. And he's going, Hoover knows how high it goes.
Yeah.
So now he's not telling Bobby he knows this because he's getting it from different sources, and he's got top echelon informants telling him who's on the take. They're putting judges in. They got politicians. They got who knows who's next. Maybe now the president, John F. Kennedy. Hoover's aware. Hoover's aware of what happened in West Virginia with mob money.
Oh, he knew about that.
Oh, 100%. All those allegations came past Hoover's desk, and I talk about it in the book.
Well, allegations. Did he think he
knew
felt he had the proof it happened?
100%, but Hoover knew he couldn't get anywhere with Bobby as AG, so Hoover just bends the knee. Hoover's like, what am I going to do? Where's this going? What am I going to do? Tell Bobby, oh, I have all these cases. Are you ready to bring them, Bobby?
Yeah,
they happen to be against you, your brother, and your father.
Yeah.
So Hoover's like, okay, here's a mounted FBI badge. You're an honorary agent.
Yeah.
Nice, I'm your buddy. So this is how Washington works. So P.S., as it goes, Bobby's pissed at Hoover for not jumping into the fight against the mob. Now, Bobby is AG, harnesses all of the agencies under his control. So you got INS, IRS, FBI, you could keep going. I don't care if it's environmental agency. He's got them all working to take down the mob. 26 agencies, I think it was, all harnessed. And one of his aides in the Justice Department said he became like the chairman, like sort of like almost like like not an official chairman, but almost like a covert chairman of like an illegal crusade. That's like what the insinuation was.
Yeah.
Because it really wasn't like, you can't tell the IRS. The IRS would say, look, we go after people for tax reasons. You can't tell us target Julian and find something because you're going to lose faith in the tax system as Americans.
That's right. It's supposed to be completely on its own.
Right. Not political, no agenda. Yeah. So they're pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, even within the IRS. And those people who are pushing back are slowly getting removed. And then Bobby goes to his old professor, I think his name was Mortimer Kaplan, and he says, look, he was an old professor from college. He goes, look, if you want to be head of the IRS, but you have to do what I'm doing, you got to go with me on this one. Yeah. I'm going after the mob. And he goes, sounds good to me. Let's do it. And he goes, and he gets appointed head of the IRS. So Bobby's kind of like getting all this like concentrated attack on the mob. And the mob is scratching it. Oh, and he's trying to get Hoover before I go to the mob, how they're pissed. Hoover is not dragging his feet. He don't want his agents involved in this. So there's several reasons. Let's go back to that. One is he's picking up all of this stuff. He knows that it goes all the way to Washington. And what is he supposed to do? Have his agents surround the Capitol Rotunda, tell everybody to come out with their hands up? Where's he going with this? If it all goes up to Washington, if they got mayors, they got congressmen, they got governors, they got senators, where you going with an investigation? Even Hoover infers at times with Bobby, okay, how about I do a deep dive into those mobsters that run the Cal Neva Lodge? Oh, the ones who are always seen there with, Your father.
Conveniently.
Yeah. Okay, you want me to do a deep dive into them? How about we do a deep dive into the mob money that went from Chicago, New York, and Las Vegas into West Virginia and Chicago just as your brother pulls out the election?
Yeah, how about that?
You want to deep dive into that? So he's trying to teach him through example. Like, kind of, come on, Bobby, don't you get it? This is how Washington works. We kind of like know where we got to walk here, right? But Bobby don't get it. Bobby don't get it.
But it all comes back to, according to you, Bobby is pissed at Trafficante, Marcello,
the mob,
and Hoffa, but he's now putting it towards all the mob, even though he knows that the other guys fucking put him in there.
Kind of the reverse. So he's going after the whole mob because he doesn't care. He hates them all. But he had a little bit of a special vengeance for those three.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't like I'm going to go after three and then because I'm going after these three, I'll grab the whole bunch of them. I'm going after the mob. I don't care. I'm the attorney general. You don't mess with me. And he tells Hoover now, you can't just walk into the Oval Office anymore. You go through the attorney general. There's a chain of command here. Hoover never had to deal with that. Hoover always went to Pennsylvania Avenue himself. He never had to go, Mr. AG, I would like to speak to the president. Not only that, when there's an FBI press release, Bobby says, you got to give it to me first. I'll edit it and let you know what you could do and say. Hoover's like, who's this guy? This guy's first teeth came in when I was already director. And he's telling me, this little whippersnapper. So Hoover's livid over this. Now Bobby at some point says, look, we're gonna get rid of Hoover. If Jack gets a second term, we'll either ease him out or force him out. One or the other. He's gone.
Good luck with that.
Well, now there's an assistant director of the FBI that says not only Bobby was promising to a lot of people and it was getting back to Hoover that he was going to get rid of Hoover, but also Bobby wanted to smear him as a homosexual, which, as we said, was unacceptable in the 1960s. So now it would be like, oh, I'm going to smear this guy as a homosexual. The guy could go, I'll tell everybody myself. But not then. You couldn't do that.
That wasn't an option.
Right. It wasn't an option. So Hoover's going to be disgraced, retired, and doomed. So he's got like nothing ahead of him with Bobby Kennedy. And I'm only saying that. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. I'm saying that because later on when the mob is threatening to murder Kennedy and all of those threats are coming past Hoover's desk, Hoover mysteriously does nothing about them.
Right.
Why isn't Hoover reporting it to the Secret Service, to the Kennedys?
Because it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, Tim.
I didn't see it. Yeah. I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you could just be inactive and be a conspirator to an extent. And he's basically inactive. I didn't see and hear anything. Don't care. So maybe because of want of it to happen, he wasn't acting on him. So, you know, because he really wants the Kennedys out. So now this is a complicated story, and it's hard in a podcast. It's easier with a book. So I'm desperately trying to put all the pieces together.
Keep putting them together. I like it.
Okay, good. So now, at some point, the CIA decides, look, we want to get rid of Castro. We want to murder him. The CIA is, during the Eisenhower administration, before Kennedy, the CIA has decided that it's okay to murder international leaders that we don't like.
Allen Dulles, yeah.
Allen Dulles.
Changed the whole narrative.
Right. Whose brother was John Foster Dulles.
Yeah, also not a great guy.
Yeah. So, you know, you have the state...
Fucking guy got an airport, though. How about that?
Oh, the worse you are, the faster you get something.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. The worst people, just go around the country and look for who gets all the names. And, you know, a lot of times...
We should name it Lucky Luciano International. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's the airport in Naples. so anyway.
But you were saying with Cuba, so the CIA decides they can whack leaders they don't like.
Right. So now it's the Kennedy. Dulles he's planning for when Castro got in, all of the Cuban exiles who left and landed in Miami, 200,000 of them.
Yep.
They come here. And they want their country back. They want their homeland back. And a small number of them, very few of those are military trained. Most of them weren't. But they're going to train to take back the country, to take back the island.
The Cuban revolutionaries, if you will.
Exactly. And they're being trained by CIA handlers.
And now this is happening, I believe, like a lot of this is in Florida and Louisiana.
Correct. Those are the two. And this is odd because nobody ever makes the connection. Why those two places? They're underwritten by two people for the most part.
Trafficante and Marcello.
Exactly. And that's where all the camps are, the majority of them. And why are those the two places where that's everywhere. And they also have a big training camp in Guatemala, but eventually the Guatemalan president says, look, you got to get them out of here. One way or the other, they need to get out of here soon because there was a lot of press that they were training there. And there was political reasons the Guatemalan president wanted them out as soon as possible. And they were forced to push up, not push up, but go ahead with the Bay of Pigs, which is the Bahina Cochinas. Bay of Pigs is what the beach was called. And they were going to hit this beach, and through their CIA handlers, they were trained to go in, and the CIA handlers promised them, look.
They would have air cover, right?
You're going to have air cover, and we'll back you if you need us. We got the whole Navy off the coast. We'll back you with air cover, and we could lob, bombs in from the water. We could even send in troops. Whatever we're going to do to help you, we'll be there. And also, too, they were going to link up with another revolutionary force inland a little after they get through the Zapata swamps, and then march toward Havana. At the same time, the mob was supposed to clip Castro. And how they were going to do it was the CIA approached first Johnny Roselli.
Yeah, stay with the mic, I'm saying. When I do this, that means stay with the mic. You're good.
I'm sorry. So they approached Johnny Roselli.
And tell people who Johnny Roselli is who didn't see episode 236.
Okay, Johnny Roselli he's a real, how do you describe him? He likes the limelight. He enjoys himself with women and wine, has a ball. He originally flees Boston, and he ends up in Chicago. He gets in with the Capone mob. Then the Chicago outfit sends him to Los Angeles to work with Jack Dragna and his crew because he becomes like a Hollywood guy. And Jack Dragna was just like there were smaller Borgatas that sort of answered to New York.
Yeah.
This is the Los Angeles Borgata sort of answered to Chicago. If New York pushed up on the Los Angeles Borgata, they'd go to Chicago and say, look, get them off our backs. So Roselli's there kind of running the show with Dragna. And then at some point they redirect him to Vegas as they get more and more of a bigger footprint in Vegas. So Johnny Roselli is kind of in with Hollywood directors and producers, make sure they have labor peace. The skim and everything involved in Las Vegas, he makes sure that it's going to the right pockets. It's being directed into the right pockets, Roselli does. So they approach Roselli, and they tell Roselli, look, we want to kill Castro. We know all you guys lost your casinos in Havana. You guys want to kill him too, right? And he says, I do. So they goes, well, how do we get this done? And he says, well, I got to talk to my boss, Sam Giancana, who's the acting boss of Chicago. So Roselli brings in Giancana into the conspiracy, introduces him to the FBI. Then Giancana says, well, look, if we're running this out of Miami, because that's where all the Cuban exiles were, and that's where the CIA had a sprawling headquarters down in Miami. If we're running it out of Miami, then we got to bring in Santo Trafficante too. So now Santo's brought into the picture. So now it's Giancana, Roselli, and Trafficante. And those are the three guys that are meeting with the CIA, and they're trying to figure out how to clip Castro.
They met him at the Fontainebleau Hotel. There was a famous meeting there, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And now at that hotel meeting, which is, I'm glad you brought it up because Trafficante was Roselli did a lot of talking, Giancana did a lot of talking, and the CIA agents did a lot of talking. But Trafficante was really, really quiet. He listened, and he never really said too much. And don't forget, he's also the Spanish interpreter when they got to talk to the exiles, the ones who don't speak English, because he spoke fluent Spanish, Trafficante, and Italian. So he's very quiet. And I connected that later on. There's allegations that Trafficante was working close with Castro for many, many years after Castro took power. Castro was
double agent kind of deal.
Kind of a double agent. So Trafficante really doesn't want to kill Castro because he's making how many millions a month trafficking drugs that Castro's sending in to Miami to boost up his revolutionary economy that really hasn't picked up speed yet. And Traficante's now, he's making a ton of money, and he's embedded in the exile communities. He's working with all these Cubans. And he realizes that I speak fluent Spanish. The Cubans are great to work with. Half his borgata is like, he's got his own borgata, and then probably double the size of that is the Cubans he's working with. And he's doing development deals with them. Don't forget the Cuban exile community, unlike the Southern Italian immigrant wave that was like when my grandparents came. They were the poorest of the poor in Italy that got on a ship and landed here. The Cuban immigrant wave, you had laborers, you had doctors, you had teachers, you had lawyers, you had everything.
Yeah, they were all wiped away in one night.
A lot of these people were geniuses. Yeah. They're well educated. The Cuban immigrant wave was probably one of the best waves in terms of a wide variety of people, including intellectuals, that the United States ever got.
All right, don't get Alessi's ego going too much over here.
Well, yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think he came on it, right? Yeah. His grandparents or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's true. So hats off to them, and they picked up speed right away. I mean, look at how far the Cuban community has gone.
It is actually pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. With rocket speed, they picked up right here. But having said that, they always wanted their country back, and they were willing to fight for it. And they felt like they're going to be sent in. All we're asking for is you back us up like you told us. Kennedy pledges on the eve of the invasion. He says, no, the United States, he publicly says, will not be involved in any type of forceful take back of Cuba. We're not going to do it.
Because he viewed it as an encroachment on the Soviet Union, right?
Yes. He viewed it as an encroachment on the rights of a small nation / right. I don't want to mess with the Soviets.
Right.
And if I mess with the Soviets, they might flex their muscle in East Berlin. They might fool around in Southeast Asia. I got other places I got to worry about what Premier Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union will do to me if I do that. So he's got the international chessboard on his mind, just as you said. Mm-hmm. So he kind of makes this pledge, but the CIA goes, don't listen to him. They tell the exiles, push comes to shove, we'll twist his arm. You're going in. Yeah. They figured, look, you know what? We're going to sit him down. You can't leave these guys.
And we have good evidence. I just want to make sure here because it'll come up in a couple minutes. We have good evidence of this pregame that occurred where Kennedy, where of course Kennedy said that, but also that the CIA said, no, don't fuck what he says. Don't worry about it. We'll make sure he sends backup.
Not only is it all sourced in my books, but there is such an abundance of sources I had to choose from that I might choose 2 or 3 where I could have probably had 20 or 30 if I wanted to just keep going. So, now and then I made my point, it's there, and I move on. But there's such an abundance of sources from the CIA community, the intelligence community, and from Kennedy's cabinet. So basically, that's why Dulles gets sacked afterwards.
Yeah.
So they go in, they hit the beaches, and very heroically.
And there's no backup, though.
No backup. So they're on the beaches. They're trying to move inland. And there's a ham radio operator in New Jersey. In Jersey? In Jersey.
Why Jersey?
You think about it. From Cuba, it's amazing, right? So
it's a long way.
Got good equipment in his garage. You sure it wasn't one of your relatives?
Hey, listen. Yeah. So I'm not saying nothing.
This ham radio operator is in like his garage, and he picks up Pepe San Roman, one of the leaders of the Cuban exile brigade, and he says, calling the free world, we are bogged down on the beach. Help us. Do not quit on us. We are fighting. Help us. Nobody's coming. So now people in the Kennedy administration and the CIA are racing around trying to twist Kennedy's arm. They're going, look, we promised them air cover. We promised them help. They're stranded on the beaches. We can't leave them there. We trained them for how many months? You can't just say to hell with them. And Kennedy goes, no, I won't do it.
But if he this is the ultimate quandary because it already looks bad when you have CIA-backed revolutionaries. It's very clear that that's what it is in the Bay. But you can at least have deniability with that. If you bring in fucking air cover or shit like that, it is now a full-blown, unquestioned, internationally recognized act of war.
Yes and no. So I'm going to say the defenders of Kennedy's decision say exactly that. And they say, well, Kennedy had every reason to step away because you can't cross that line in the sand. And there is some truth to that. It makes sense. However, this is the flip side of it. So the first mission that kicks off the Bay of Pigs invasion is they had like these 8 leftover bombers from World War II, American bombers, that they repainted with some Cuban Air Force markings. And they were like anybody like it. And they on the way, okay, 7 of them bomb a few planes on the ground, while the 8th flies to Miami. And the guy gets out and says, there were 8 of us that defected from Cuba. And I'm here, and I'm so happy to be an American. And they, meanwhile, though, on the way out, 7 of my brothers knocked out a little of the Air Force on our way out. So everybody's like, nah, this don't make sense. That's an American plane with some paint on it.
Yeah.
This is an American. America's hand is behind this. That's when Kennedy says the second airstrike, which was supposed to take out the Soviet MiGs, he goes, no, we can't do it now. Now we look like idiots. But the other guys are going, they know it's us already, Jack.
Yeah.
It's American planes. It's out. We can't look like fools any more than we do. So they're kind of twisting his arm. Then the other things they're saying is, if Castro's got Soviet MiGs, why do we care if we're using our planes to help the exiles? Why could the Soviets help him, but we can't help them? So this is the counter argument that the defenders of Kennedy never bring up.
But also Kennedy, this is one of those situations, it kind of reminds me of Obama's comments in 2013 about Syria, the red line, where he said, or in 2012, whenever he actually said it, before the chemical weapons went off with Assad, he said that would be, if Assad and his regime chose to use chemical weapons in any fashion, that would be a red line, meaning like we'd have to come in. And then he felt like a bitch afterwards because he's like, fuck, now I want to go in there because Assad did that. And then they didn't end up going in. So Kennedy's like, well, if I say I'm not going to do this and then I do it, am I?
This is the Jordan Belfort story. If you're going to stick a gun in his mouth and tell him you got to come up with the money or I'm going to kill you, you got to be willing to kill him then. Right? Or don't do it. So it's the same thing on a very small level. That's a big level, and you just nailed it. It's a perfect geopolitical example of later on. So, so Kennedy's totally blowing it now in the eyes of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the eyes of the CIA, and they're starting to despise him now.
Yeah, when you talk to guys who are still around from that era, or the guys who came up underneath them, especially the ones who are of Cuban heritage, the way they talk about John Kennedy is, especially when you consider the CIA's floated as being behind his murder. These are not ways that I would ever talk about him, but they disparage him like crazy. They call him a traitor. They call him all these things.
They felt his inaction was tantamount to treason.
I know Felix Rodriguez said that.
You know them all.
Directly,
So, I mean, that's how they felt. Now, the Cuban exile community, following the missile crisis too, which we could talk about, but they've never really gone back. They've gone red at the polls. They became Republicans and and that stems back to the Kennedy days. They felt like they were betrayed twice. Now, I'm going to tell you the second betrayal was even worse. So after the first, they do this postmortem. Jack says to Bobby, I'm going to scatter the CIA. I don't forget who said this, but he said, I think he said it to Bobby, I'm going to scatter the CIA into 1 million pieces and scatter them to the winds or whatever. Then he says, look, do this postmortem and tell Dulles he's got like X amount of months to resign. Dulles is out. Now, originally when Jack became president, he was having this like little powwow, I think in like Cape Cod or maybe Palm Beach, one of the Kennedy estates. And he had some friends going, who are you going to get rid of first, Jack? Hoover or Dulles? I think you should get rid of both of them. And he wanted to get rid of both, but he goes, you know what? The election was thin. I don't have a mandate to rule. Let's keep the old guard in place for the moment. We'll deal with them at some point in the future, but I don't want to get rid of them right away. So he kept Dulles in place. He kept Hoover in place. And now he's getting rid of Dulles. Dulles is getting the boot in the ass, and Hoover's going, I must be next. Don't forget that.
Have you ever read Devil Chessboard by David Talbot?
Yeah, it's excellent too. Yeah,
I mean, effectively,
some good writers.
Amazing, a lot. Amazing stuff. But like, effectively, Dulles was still running the CIA from his Georgetown fucking town.
Oh yeah, If you told me he's still running it today, I might believe it. I mean, Allen Dulles. Yeah. So, never in the history of politics did we have a brother controlling the State Department and another brother controlling the intelligence agency, where everything could be done at mom's table.
Yeah.
Think about that. That's not my own quote, by the way. That comes from somebody who wrote that.
While one brother's president and the other one's AG.
Well, that too.
Very interesting world to live in.
That too. So first you had the Dulles brothers, John Foster and Allen, making decisions at mommy's table.
The under-levers of the government.
And then you got the Kennedy brothers.
And then the elected over-levers.
Exactly. 100%. So now the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban exile community, they're taken captive. They're humiliated in Castro's prisons. The only reason Castro doesn't kill them all is because he doesn't want to give Kennedy a reason to send the Marines in. So he backs off. I think he shoots 4 or 5 guys just as because Castro used to love show trials.
Oh, yeah.
When he took over. So, but shoots a couple, but for the most part, he lets them live. And then he basically ransoms them for farm equipment, pharmaceutical stuff, and he sends them back. When they get back, the Cuban Missile Crisis, by the way, happens. This is a big deal, too. So they're pissed at Kennedy, first of all, the Cuban exile community, and the CIA guys, and the mob. The mob, don't forget the mob still wants back their Havana casinos, too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's just keep that in the back of your head. Yeah, they all are. So now, and Marcelo, too. Marcelo, big investments there. And Traficante.
All of them. Yeah.
So now, Missile Crisis comes along. So Dulles resigns, quote unquote, really resigns, but he's sacked. John McCone comes in. He's like a leftover from the Eisenhower administration. He was head of energy or something, and they put him in as the head of the CIA. But John McCone's kind of in the dark. Later on, I think either Richard Helms or William Harvey testified that we didn't tell McCone too much. It was advisable not to not to advise him.
That's the problem.
Yeah. We didn't really think it was advisable to bring him into the mix on what we were doing with the mob, how we were trying to kill Castro. So McCone's completely in the dark.
Side note here, this is exactly why, cynically, I don't have a ton of hope for someone who seems pretty good, like a Tulsi Gabbard going into DNI right now. Because if she's someone who's kind of fought back against a lot of the bad things that seem to happen in the underbelly of the agency world, why the fuck are these people who are in control of those levers going to read her in on shit?
It would have to be a radical purge of the department, and it would have to happen so quickly before the adversaries are able to muster a defense. And so I don't know what's going to happen, if that's going to work. If it's not, time will tell. But it has to be so radical and so quick and so pervasive that's the only way it's
sure.
Yeah, that's the only way it's going to pull
But
off.
You're saying Helms is brought in there, and he's not read in.
Well, Helms is not McCone.
Or McCone's brought in.
Yeah, so they're not bringing McCone into the loop. So he's kind of on the outside, but they keep working with the mob. And now the Missile Crisis comes along, and McCone tells Kennedy, "Hey, listen, we got nuclear warheads 90 miles off the coast of Florida, Soviet missiles. What are we going to do about it?" So they show him the aerial photographs and stuff, and Kennedy summons Bobby in the cabinet, and this is the known as the 12 or 13 days, right? So he goes through options, and most of the quote unquote hawks in the administration, I think the terms doves and hawks came from this period actually. Right. So the hawks in the administration and the Joint Chiefs are going, go in. You have no choice. Don't worry about the Bay of Pigs. That's passed. You were iffy. You were on the fence. These are missiles that have a range. Not only, as Khrushchev famously said, he goes, we could have took out every city in the United States, not to mention a little village like Washington. He goes, it was nothing for us. And I show a picture in volume 2 where there's the range of the missiles, and they went all the way up to Canada. So they could have literally hit any city in the United States. So they're going to Kennedy, take them out, send in the Marines. It's a perfect excuse. And we won't look like the imperialist mercenaries that Castro keeps telling the world we are. We'll just look like defenders of democracy, defenders of our country. Let's go in. And Kennedy's wavering. He's going, I don't know. And guess who's saying no? Bobby goes, it's going to give us like a black mark, a smirch. We don't want that. And I quote that. That's what Bobby's words were. Don't do it, Jack. We can't do it. We'll look like bullies. And the rest of them are going, are you out of your mind? We got to go in. Send them in. So now, after this back and forth for a number of days, the two options that are available to Kennedy are sending the military in and overthrowing Castro, getting the missiles out, which pretty much everybody wants except Kennedy and Bobby, Jack and Bobby, and a couple of other people come around to that. But originally, even members of NATO, de Gaulle, I think it was Macmillan in England, they're going, go in, we got you back.
They were telling him.
Oh, in the very beginning. Later on, Macmillan, the guy from England, changed his tune. The man from France still was pissed, and I'll tell you why, de Gaulle.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. De Gaulle would say that.
Oh, go in. They don't want this. So now Kennedy has two options: that, go in, or quarantine the island, a naval quarantine, completely block off the island. Any Soviet ships, tell them to turn around. Any Soviet subs, tell them to surface and get back. Those are the two options. Invasion. Now,
that kind of is effectively the same thing, though.
No, because a quarantine.
It's different. It's different, meaning it's not like the boots are going on the ground and taking over, but you are shutting them off from the world completely.
The quarantine allows at least some wiggle room for Khrushchev to then counter, right? So Kennedy's afraid. The people who defend Kennedy's decision say that Kennedy's afraid of an invasion because of what you said earlier. What happens if the Soviets get a little aggressive now in other places? Or what happens if it ends in a nuclear war? What happens if Khrushchev goes, let's push the button? So, this is a lunatic. He slams his shoe on the microphone, Khrushchev, right? He's doing a phony act. He's doing a nut act. He's like Chin Gigante on a world stage. Right. But Kennedy don't know that at the time. So Kennedy's a little afraid of a nuclear war. Maybe he flexes his muscles elsewhere. Again, he's got the international chessboard in mind, but the hawks are all telling him, go for it. And the Joint Chiefs, go in. And the other option is the quarantine, where at least there's wiggle room to talk now. So that's what happens. So he does the quarantine, and then he does a back channel to Khrushchev.
The red line.
And he says, look, let's figure this out quick. And Bobby even said, the generals may mutiny if you don't pull this off fast. We figure this out. Imagine saying that.
Was there also, did you come across this in your research about how Kennedy allegedly also had conversations with Khrushchev on, when I said the red line, there was like a red phone allegedly that they had a direct line to each other to whatever. But
it was through correspondence.
Part of the conversations morphed into, let's both denuclearize.
Yes. And
the generals got wind of this and thought, my God.
And the CIA.
Off with his head. That's crazy.
Yes. There's a lot of truth to that. So Kennedy he gets his back channel set up to Khrushchev, and it's Bobby and a Soviet ambassador or foreign department of the Soviets or ambassador. I can't remember the guy's name. Chemechenkov, whatever. They all sound the same, the Russian names, including every gangster of Russian descent I was in jail with. They all sound the same. So he goes, look, I'll take down the missiles in Turkey. We had U.S. missiles in Turkey facing the Soviet Union. I'll take those down if you take away these. And this was a side deal that Kennedy made that didn't come out for 25, 26 years. Nobody knew. Everybody thought Kennedy got Khrushchev to back down. But the back channel side deal was, I'll take down those missiles pointing at the Soviet Union, which had NATO up in arms. De Gaulle is now twisted. De Gaulle's, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're taking the missiles away that are pointing us. What about us? Don't we have a say in this?
Yeah.
So now everybody's pissed at Kennedy, including, as you said, the CIA, the generals. They're going, what's this guy got, a little love affair with a red czar?
Yeah, that was like the last straw for them.
This is like out of control. And he's got this correspondence going back and forth with Khrushchev. And I've read a lot of the correspondence. And, it's not going through the proper channels. It's not being screened by intelligence agencies.
Direct. Yeah.
They can't have that. You can't. They just didn't want it. So now that's a problem now too. So now here's a decisive thing that contributes to Kennedy's assassination, and this is big because we're starting to creep closer and closer to Dealey Plaza. When he decides to quarantine the island and makes a side deal with Khrushchev, he also tells Khrushchev, Kennedy does, we won't have a hand in any invasion of Cuba. We won't back it. It will not happen again. And Khrushchev wanted that guarantee because that's now the Bay of Pigs that you botched up and the missile crisis you botched up. What are the odds you're going to botch up a third time? Doesn't want it, Khrushchev. He wants Kennedy to give him a promise. So Kennedy says it's not going to happen. The exiles who were biting their nails in Miami, going, we're going to get our homeland back. The missile crisis was a godsend for us. We're getting our homeland back. The Marines are going to take it back for us. What they botched up in the Bay of Pigs, don't worry about it. We're going to have it back right now. They're all biting, chewing their nails in Miami, going, we're this close to getting our homeland back. And then Kennedy blows it, they felt. Whether he did or didn't, whether historians paint them as
But that's what they thought.
Exactly. So now they're livid, but it gets worse. It gets worse. The exiles, the militant exiles who want to take back their homeland, who were running sabotage missions into Cuba, whether through air or sea, they got private planes, they got boats. These guys, Kennedy now, they've been the mascots of liberty since Castro kicked them out. They've been billed as literally the mascots of liberty, the mascots of democracy. We've been like coddling them. And now Kennedy says to keep the promise to Khrushchev, any of these guys get caught training or doing anything against Cuba, they get locked up. And and that's very, very often overlooked in a lot of the books I read.
Alessi, is this lining up with your family tree, lineage, storytelling?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
He knows better than I do.
I want to meet your grandfather. So now they're enemies of the Kennedy administration from being the mascots of liberty, from depending on Kennedy, who made campaign pledges.
Oh, yeah, that's a no-no.
Now we're getting locked up. And are they locking them up? You bet your ass they are. They're being pulled over by Coast Guard cutters. They got locked up in the Bahamas by a U.S. joint British force that locked them up. Exactly. That anywhere they're training, they're getting locked up, these guys. And they're going, whoa, we're never getting the homeland back with Kennedy in. It's over. Now what?
Well, here's a question. I don't know if you ever found anything that could really kind of get anywhere on this, but I feel like this is never discussed. Kennedy's killed November 22nd, 1963. The election was a year away. Did they look at any possibility of like, well, let's just get a fucking great candidate to run against them and like, I don't know, like fuck with the election or something?
I think there were other forces at work, and I think that they doubted very much. Even let's just take Dealey Plaza. When Kennedy goes to Texas, he's told that it's very dangerous, don't go, by a number of people around him. Don't go to Texas. There's a lot of radicals. They beat up Adelaide Stevenson. They beat him over the head with sticks and
Why'd they do that?
He went there before Kennedy. He was part of the Kennedy. He was ambassador to the UN or something. Yeah. And they just didn't want any Democrats or anybody from Kennedy's administration in Texas.
Texas didn't like Democrats.
Right. And they were getting more and more. They like a Lyndon Johnson Democrat. He was okay.
Yeah.
But Kennedy was now going more and more left, and they were unhappy with it.
Okay.
They liked more Democrats who were more towards center right at the time. There used to be. It's not the same polarization we have today. There used to be Democrats who like Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was H.L. Hunt was as right wing as you could get, the oil baron H.L. Hunt. Yeah. And he backed Johnson. He liked Johnson. He felt Johnson was
Johnson was a deal maker.
And he felt like he was master of the Senate.
Yeah.
Knew how to make deals.
Johnson was a nastier, more like radical personality version of Bill Clinton before Bill Clinton.
I would agree with that.
He was very much a guy that was like, where's the wind blowing? All right, let's go there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's right. And I mean, the Caro multi-volume biography just lays that out time and again. Yeah. I mean, that's That's Johnson. So Johnson sort of basically, or rather, the Cubans felt like they would be better with Johnson. The mob had backed Johnson during all of his campaigns as a politician. They felt they'd be better with Johnson. J. Edgar Hoover had lunch with Johnson once a week. He felt he'd be better with Johnson. Everybody pretty much felt like, the CIA felt like they'd be better with Johnson.
So they wanted Johnson, and getting him on there would be tough because he's intra-party and literally the VP to this guy.
Yeah. And what do you think Johnson wanted during the missile crisis?
Well, he wanted the opposite of Kennedy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wanted them to go in.
Yeah.
And he said, we should show our strength. What are you doing? He couldn't believe they weren't going in. So, I mean, that tells them
Sure.
what they get out of Johnson.
Sure.
So now everybody's starting to like Johnson. And I found no evidence, as some people claim Johnson was involved in the conspiracy.
Took the question out of my mouth.
Oh boy, let me tell you, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there wasn't enough for me to commit it to paper because I couldn't find anything solid. And if without anything solid, I just had to.
Good for you.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
I love that.
Yeah, time and again. And it's easy to talk on a podcast with you, which means I could say what I was thinking behind the pen.
Right.
And
that's why we do it.
Yeah, and I felt exactly, this is great. So I felt like there was a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing towards Johnson. For example, when they came around the turn on Elm Street, before Kennedy's hit,
right.
There's pictures that show Johnson hit the floor before the first shot. He's in a backup limo. He's in a couple of cars back, and
almost like he knew what they were coming.
Well, that's the argument, And then there's somebody said Johnson's longtime girlfriend, he wasn't faithful to Lady Bird. His longtime girlfriend, what a surprise. His longtime
she wasn't a looker.
His longtime girlfriend, his longtime girlfriend said there was a meeting, where Johnson attended and he knew something, but I couldn't get anything concrete. So I had to stay away from it. But the biggest piece of circumstantial evidence is this. And this is interesting. We'll go back to where we were, but this is important to get it out. And I make a really clear-cut case about this in the book because I do have the evidence for this. Although I don't have evidence that this means he participated. I have evidence that this happened, that's it, because we know it did. Bobby wants Johnson off the ticket in 1964. He hates Johnson. Bobby does. Bobby holds grudges. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Well, Johnson called Joe an old Nazi or something when he campaigned against Jack, and Bobby never forgave him. And the things that were said in the campaign, they go at each other's throats.
Oh yeah, so politics.
Whatever Bobby said about Johnson, he's not asking for forgiveness. But whatever Johnson said about Bobby, or Jack rather, Bobby never lets it go. He hates him. Despises Johnson, and he got everybody in Washington to hate Johnson to the point where everybody in Washington, he went from master of the Senate to an inactive VP role where they don't let him do anything, and he's being abused. He goes to a party one day, and there's these two like mid-level government employees, and they're bad-mouthing Johnson, and one of them goes, "I think the vice president just heard us," and the other one goes, "Fuck him," and Johnson heard. And Johnson was like at a loss, like, what do I say? I'm the vice president. I don't know how to react to that. And he just walks away with his head down. Then when
Johnson
didn't know how to act. And then at times, Bobby and Ethel Kennedy, when they invited Johnson to Hickory Hill, the state in McLean, Virginia, they would sit Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird, at the quote unquote losers table. This is an insult to Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
He knows he's sitting at the losers table. It got back to him. So, all these things and then Bobby takes the final step. Leading up to as the campaign is building and the 1964 election's coming up, Bobby says, I want him off the ticket. Jack says it. There's a lot of evidence. People go, oh, he really was going to keep him. Jack's own secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, who was with him from soup to nuts, start to finish, said he was definitely getting rid of Johnson. And other people said it too. Richard Nixon, other people said he was getting rid of Johnson. Bobby goes after people around Johnson. So Bobby's the attorney general. This is how reckless Bobby was.
Oh my God, he's going legally after them.
Legally. He uses the attorney general's position. He locks up a guy named Billy Sol Estes, who was doing these agricultural frauds and using Johnson as his Washington guy to back them. And he's doing them in Texas. And Johnson's directly connected to these. They're government funded. It's government deals. But he's working hand in hand, Johnson is, with Billy Sol Estes. And Bobby goes after Billy Sol Estes. Now, the guy investigating Billy Sol Estes, and this is proven This isn't hypothetical. This isn't circumstantial. He gets killed. The agricultural agent who's investigating Billy Solestes and how it connects to Johnson, he gets killed. So they rule it a suicide. Nobody ever explained how a suicide occurred with 5 bolt-action rifle shots to the chest. Kind of hard to kill yourself like that.
Pretty hard.
Years later, they reversed the coroner's report, and Billy Solestes said, look, there were a lot of people who were killed, and Johnson had something to do with it. That came from Billy Solestes. That I mentioned in the book because it came directly from him. But Bobby's targeting Billy Solestes to get to Johnson, and he wants this to go to Johnson. And he offers Billy Solestes a deal if he flips on Johnson. Then he goes to Bobby Baker. Bobby Baker is another close associate of Johnson. When Johnson was master of the Senate, Bobby Baker was the Senate secretary, who basically is the guy in the know, who handles everything for the chief. And he knows who to talk to, who to bribe, who to corrupt, what deals to make. He's got all the dirt. Bobby goes after Bobby Baker. Bobby Kennedy goes after Bobby Baker. And he's locking up Bobby Baker now, telling Bobby Baker to flip on Johnson. Literally, the day of Dealey Plaza, fast forward. Literally, the day of Dealey Plaza, they get a witness into a Senate committee, closed-door Senate committee.
Conveniently.
Investigative committee. And they're investigating Bobby Baker and Johnson. And the guy throws a ton of evidence on the table that's literally going to not only knock Johnson off the ticket, but put him in jail. And literally, that meeting is happening, and the evidence is being sifted through as the shots ring out in Dealey Plaza.
And you're saying Lyndon had nothing to do with this?
I'm saying I couldn't get direct evidence, a lot of
Fair
circumstantial, and I put in all the circumstantial, but I could never commit and say Johnson did it too.
Sure.
But all the circumstantial's in there.
It's a hell of a lot of circumstantial.
Let the reader decide. Let the reader decide. But I couldn't make that jump, and I was dying to. I was dying to say, look, on the mob, on the street, if we went to a sit-down, I'd say he's got to go. He did it. But that's different rules, right? So this is, we're playing by different. I'm a historian. As a historian,
you would never do that, Lou.
Yeah. So I painted the picture, but I couldn't say he had something to do with it. When people I know had something to do with it, I say it. Where the evidence is hard evidence and it's overwhelming.
Understood.
David Ferry, Carlos Marcello, these guys definitely had something to do with it. Dulles, I couldn't directly connect. I connect the Secret Service to it. We should talk about that at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. So Johnson, literally the guy with all the evidence, as the Senate committee, they get word that Kennedy was just killed and Johnson's top dog. And the Senate committee literally goes like this and pulls all the evidence. And the guy goes, no, give me all that back. And they go, no, this is ours now. They didn't want it now to use against Johnson. They wanted to bury it. They know he's top dog. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. Now, there were editors who were covering this of Time or Life magazine that said, we had him. We had him by the balls. He was gone. And if we would have, if Kennedy, the shots didn't ring out in Dealey Plaza,
we would have been able to take him out.
Johnson was going to jail.
Yeah.
I quoted in the book.
Yeah.
Not only was he off the ticket, he's going to jail. So that said, that's Johnson. That
changes history.
Yeah, so that might be Johnson's. Look, I think what might have happened, my best, if Johnson didn't have an active role, because I couldn't prove that he did, everybody knows that Johnson will be better than Jack. So maybe he got a wink at some point saying something like, look, if something happens to Jack, just don't worry about it. Like you could tell, like, let's say you're in the mob, right? And let's say you're beefing with Alessi, and you guys are going back and forth for years and over everything you could think of. And at some point I go to you, I can't bring you in on what I'm going to do. But I want to kind of give you, I go, look, if something one day happens to Alessi, just don't get nervous if somebody knocks on your door. Seriously, but I don't want to tell you what's going to happen. And then maybe when you come to me and then something happens to him and you come to me and go, was that you? I go, no. I just said don't get nervous, but that wasn't me. It's like
deniability.
Deniability.
Yes.
So maybe something like that. I don't know. But Johnson knew that when he was being sworn in, first of all, it was unnecessary to be sworn in. You automatically become the president.
Wait, you don't have to be, but you still have to be sworn in.
Nicholas Katzenbach, who was the stand-in attorney general for Bobby when he was incapacitated after his brother's death, and became, I think, the fill-in later. Katzenbach said they were calling all around to say, how does this work? We need a judge. Johnson was. And they said something like, it's not a rush. It's not a rush. It's automatic. But Johnson wanted it immediately on Air Force One, and he wanted Jacqueline Kennedy present.
In her blood-soaked dress.
Which he refused to take off.
Yep.
They wanted her to take it off.
What a picture that is.
Incredible. She goes, let them see what they did.
Yep.
Not let him, Oswald, see what he did. Let them see what they did.
Yeah, that was a very telling line.
Interesting. In a blood-soaked dress, caked with blood. And they wanted her to change. Lady Bird said, please, go change. And she said, no, they're going to see what they did. But why is Johnson, and he's calling around, he gets a judge, Sarah Hughes. By the way, Sarah Hughes is a judge that Johnson wanted to become, he wanted to get her on the bench. And guess who knocked it down? He had to fight with Bobby. He said, she's too old, I don't want her. And he went back and forth, and finally Johnson got her the nomination and got her on the bench, and that's who he calls to swear him in on Air Force One. So Sarah Hughes even hated Bobby. I mean, you could keep going. I even point the finger slightly without any evidence, so I don't say for sure, but I make an insinuation, an inference, that Mayor Cabell, the mayor of Dallas, during Kennedy's assassination, happens to be the brother of General Charles Cabell, who was of the CIA trying to get Kennedy to do the airstrike. Mm-hmm. And Kennedy refused. Conveniently. So conveniently, it happens in Dallas where Cabell, but there's other interesting coincidences too. So leading up to, this is interesting. Nobody ever, the geographics, the geography involved is interesting if you look at it. There were 3 places where it was planned that Kennedy was going to buy it. And a lot of people don't know this part. First, there was an informant in Florida. And it was, so Marcello's floating around the idea at the time, I got $1 million on Kennedy's head. And then he gets...
Oh, he was saying this.
Well, there was a guy named Eugene De La Parra, who was a government informant, who said, I was with this other guy, Tannenbaum, who's a Marcello gangster. And Marcello's brother, but it's coming from Marcello's brother put $1 million on Kennedy's head when he comes down south, anybody who takes him out. And $1 million is like $1 for Marcello. He's doing $1 billion a year, remember that. $1 million to somebody making $1 billion a year. It's like me saying,
like a sign of disrespect almost.
Can I borrow?
At least put like 10 on my head.
Oh, Marcello may have gone for more than 10 at the end, and he could have easily. We need to get into, by the way, how the hatred of Marcello and what Bobby did to him, and how that hatred was that's important too. But so there's an informant in Florida, and he's talking to some other guy, and he goes, is Kennedy really going to buy it? The informant says to the other guy, is Kennedy really going to buy it when he comes down south? And he goes, oh yeah, it's already planned. It's happening here. And he goes, really? Because Kennedy was planned to go to Florida, Chicago, and Texas. Those were the three upcoming events. So first they got him, who's Florida, Chicago, and Texas?
Trafficante, Giancana, and Marcello.
Is that a little coincidental? I'm the first person who ever wrote that, and you're the first person who ever said it.
The only thing I would say that could be less than coincidental there, because technically Marcello is Louisiana, but as you said, he basically runs Texas. The only thing that could be a little coincidental, and I'd have to go check some electoral map stuff at this point, but you're a year out from an election, and you're going to do events in 3 states with a good amount of electoral votes, 2 of which, Illinois and Texas, just delivered you the last election, and you could be going there to, you know.
And even regardless of why the administration planned that route, which could have been nefarious, the reasons, depending on who's planning the motorcade routes. And we could get into that with the Secret Service later. But even aside from that, it just so happens, though, that these are the 3 places that, and I'm going to tell you about what's happening in these 3 places, that they didn't just bank on Texas. Texas was option number 3. And I'm the first person to point that out.
Okay, why are you the first person? What's your evidence?
Okay. So, well, the evidence comes from other people who have pointed out that these things happen. I shouldn't take all the credit for discovering this evidence, only discovering that they had 3 shots at getting Kennedy, and they happened to be 3 places controlled by Giancana, Trafficante, and Marcello. And those are 3 main conspirators besides Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa was more of we're going to make Jimmy believe this was a favor for him, which I'll explain. We're going to make Jimmy believe this is a favor for him just to make sure we always have access to that team's pension fund. Because Hoffa wanted him dead. Yeah. But they kind of like led Jimmy Hoffa to believe, not that it's just for us, Jimmy, but we're doing you a little bit of a favor here too. Because Bobby's going to destroy your life. Sure. We'll figure this out. And I'll tell you why they focused on Jack instead of Bobby too. That goes back to Marcelo. I'm counting on you to remind me these things. So
it's your world. I'm living in it today.
These are interesting things. It's just hard to get it all out in one string.
Oh, yeah.
So first Miami, the informant goes, how are you going to get him when he comes down here? And he goes, it's all in the works already. It's going to be a high-powered rifle from a building. That's how we're going to kill him when he comes to Florida.
Like a book repository.
That gets better in Chicago. So he goes, we're going to get him with a high-powered rifle from a building. And we're going to pick up, it's all planned that they're going to pick up some nut job within an hour of the thing, and we're going to dump it on him. So the informant runs back to the Miami Police Department, and he says, look, I got something. And they go and they report it to the Secret Service, and they defuse it in Miami. The police, for the most part, defuse the assassination attempt in Miami. The guy runs, and later he's mysteriously found dead after the assassination. This guy Miltia was his name. Okay, so that's out of the picture. The next place Kennedy's going is Chicago. On the eve of his trip to Chicago, he's going there for like the Army-Navy game or something, and he's going to do a big thing, presidential campaign thing. So he's going to Chicago, and on the eve of his visit there, a guy by the name of Lee, calls up the Secret Service in Chicago and says, look, they're going to kill Kennedy on the motorcade route. It's going to be 4 guys with high-powered rifles. They're going to trap him off. And they're going to be dumping it on this other guy, Thomas Arthur Valley. Okay, so they go out and they grab 2 out of the 4 guys whose apartments they had high-powered rifles. They had pictures of Kennedy, of the route, of this, and they go, "What the hell's going on here? We have no record of what happened with those guys, who they were, nothing."
Why is that?
I have no idea, but we may get it in the document dump. So let's see. I have no idea. Now they pick up this guy, Thomas Arthur Valley. Now, Thomas Arthur Valley is an interesting character. Could kind of pass for Lee Harvey Oswald's cousin. He's an ex-Marine. He worked with intelligence agencies. He was close with the Cuban exiles. And he was thought of as maybe they painted him as a little nutty. He's a little nutty. Well, he lands in Chicago just before Kennedy's motorcade, like Oswald lands in Dallas. And just as Oswald got a job at the book depository in Dallas, he got a job at a printing building, and his window would have been 3 stories lower than Oswald's, and even closer to the limousine. As it turns, As it turns in front of Thomas Arthur Valley's building, right in front of his building, and goes to a slow crawl. And there's other 4 shooters, don't forget. So the 4 shooters are going to take out Kennedy when he gets into this kill zone in Chicago. And Thomas Arthur Valley is going to be up there looking at it, and they're going to grab him. And they arrest him, though, prior to, because this guy named Lee ratted on him. Who's Lee? I don't know.
Could be.
Could be Lee, the only Lee we know, right? So.
And you said that 2 of the 4, we don't even know whatever happened to them?
We don't know. The guys who were picked up and interrogated were let go. I couldn't find anything as to who they were, what they said. I looked and looked and looked. If there's a historian out there that knows something I don't, please email Julian Dorey.
Please.
Yeah. Or email me through my website. But you first.
Email me first.
Yeah, email Julian. And we'll come back.
I need the content.
Yeah, you do. Get to Julian. And I'll be happy to watch it. So basically, this guy now, he's pulled in, but that's not canceled, that trip. What happens is Diem in Vietnam is killed in a CIA-backed coup, which Kennedy is distraught about. He thought the CIA was just going to take him out of power. He didn't know they were going to kill him.
Oh, they don't kill people.
Kennedy pretended he didn't know.
Jesus
Whatever
Christ.
The case is, I know.
That's some naivete.
I know. Well, defenders of Kennedy have sworn that he had no idea.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So he cancels the trip, last minute. He's got issues with Vietnam. Cancel Chicago. And now there's one place where it's got to happen. It's got to happen in Dallas. And who controls Dallas? Carlos Marcello through his Texas Borgata, run by Joe Civillo and Joe Campisi.
Yep.
And who's one of the closest guys to Joe Campisi, the underboss of the Civillo Borgata? Jack Ruby.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.